Good morning to all. I know you can hear me. I want to go ahead and get started, and it's wonderful to see everybody here today. As everyone knows, you're here because you know that today is the second of our Easter People presentation, and we are privileged and delighted to have Carrie Phillips be our presenter. Especially privileged and delighted because, as you will have heard in the prayers of the people, today is her and FJ's 12th wedding anniversary. So happy anniversary. And as I have already said to Carrie, the woman is clearly a living saint to have put up with. Yeah, I think even after. Yeah, he's not right. I think even FJ would agree with that. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Most holy God, for all of your blessings, for the beauty of this day, for the gorgeousness of this creation, for the privilege of being your people, for the joy of being together this morning, and for the delight of welcoming Carrie to our midst, we give you our thanks and our eternal praise. Watch over us, protect us, preserve us, guide and guard us with your Spirit, and bring us into the fold of your good shepherd, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. So, no more. No, even now. Even now. Even now. Jeez. What am I going to do with you? Carrie?
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me as one of your Easter people this year. When Jason called, you can't hear me? Oh, okay. All right. Can you hear me back there? All right. When Jason called to ask me to become one of the Easter people this year, he was very polite to inquire if it was a good time to talk, because given the hour of the day. And I assured him, after I checked that dinner was, yes, working, underway, looked in, George was sitting in the dining room, continuing to craft with leftover Valentine paraphernalia that we were working on, and Everett was at a play date. So, yes, I have a couple free minutes to talk. So we chatted just a few minutes, and I got off the phone with him, and I walk in to check in on George, and he says to me, "Mommy, I think there is an eye in my nose." An eye in your nose? He picks up a little plastic googly eye from the table that he's using in his art projects and says, "Like this one." "Oh, you put it in your nose?" He smiles big, so I know this is true. I'm like, "Great, okay, let's think about this. What do we do about an eye and a nose? Are you sure it's in your nose?" "Yes, I can feel it." Okay, so I'm feeling his nose. "Okay, I don't feel it, but you say it's in there, so I'm going to believe you. Let's try to blow it out." So we try to blow it out. That doesn't work. I try pepper to make him sneeze. That doesn't work. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe, buddy, maybe it fell out. Maybe it's not really in there. And he's like, "No, Mommy, it's in there." And then he sniffs, and he starts going, gagging. At this point, I'm like, all right, there's an eye up your nose, and I'm not really sure how I'm going to handle this. So thankfully, I stay calm, and I call the pediatrician, and I talk to I get the nurse, and after she stops laughing hysterically, she says, "Well, I think I know what you need to do. Lay him down on the ground." So I lay him down on the ground, and she says, "Put your mouth over his and blow into his mouth like you're giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation." Like, okay. So I do this, and George comes up, eyes open. "Mommy, what are you doing?" Like, I forgot that he doesn't know what mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I mean, the nurse is on the speakerphone, so I know what she's saying, and I think he knows, but he doesn't know. So I'm like, okay, I have to try this one more time, buddy. All right? So I'm gonna blow into your mouth, and it's gonna try to blow the eye out of your nose. Okay, so I do it. It's not working, and then I am just laughing hysterically. And the nurse says, "Come on in." So we go in. The doctor does all her little tricks and whatnot, no eye to be found. She's like, you know what, I think he probably inhaled it based on what you're saying, and he swallowed it. So he's fine. All right. So, in case you're wondering, there's no moral or spiritual component to me telling you this story. What I want you to know is that I wrote my Easter story in my free minutes. And now you know what free minutes look like in my house. I hope your expectation is set for what you're about to hear. It seems to me very fitting that I tell you my story this year, the year we're focused on thin spaces. Even as I say the words thin spaces, I get goosebumps and excited and curious, and I want to know and experience more because I feel naturally connected to the concept. So possibly you'll recognize some thin spaces in my story today. My spiritual story begins before me. My parents were high school sweethearts, married right after my mom's graduation. Not long after that, they wanted to start a family. After 6 long years, 5 miscarriages, and a full-term stillborn baby, I was born. I know I was a blessing to them because of this. I know I was loved because I was not an easy baby to love. I was what they called colicky, crying for long periods of time for no apparent reason. My mom says, you would cry, and I would cry, and you would cry, and I would cry. I still sometimes cry for no obvious reason. In my favorite book, The Alchemist, there is a line that says, be aware of the place where you are brought to tears. That is where I am, and that is where your treasure is. After much contemplation on the subject of tears, I've come to realize that there is a reason I experience unexpected tears. It's in the presence of pure authenticity. It's when I'm simply myself in the presence of something or someone else themselves. Like when I snuggle into bed at night with my boys to read stories, sometimes tears will just gently fall. My first memory, and I think first experience of knowing God, was when I was 2.5 years old at my great-grandmother's funeral. My parents say I kept asking, what shoes is she wearing? They suggested it was an early indication of my love for fashion. Actually, it was because I have a clear vision. Now, I don't know if it's a memory or a dream, but it's very clear, I can see it, of holding my great-grandmother's hand, walking in clouds. And when I look down, I can't see our feet. So hence my question, what shoes is she wearing? As I approached school age, I began attending Sunday school at the only church in town, the United Methodist Church. The only church in town was acceptable because my mom was raised Catholic and my dad was raised farmer. His God is Mother Nature. My mom grew up in a traditional Catholic church where she and her sisters memorized what they needed to memorize, and they learned to be good girls. When I was very young, my mom's sister divorced her abusive husband. At that point, their father, my grandfather, decided that if one of his daughters wasn't going to be welcome in church, then that was not the right church for their family. So they started going to the local Presbyterian church at that point, and my mom followed their lead. Go to church on Sunday, it doesn't matter where. In the Methodist church, I learned good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell. So I very much wanted to be a good girl. I continued attending the church and Sunday school through confirmation class. At that point, my parents gave me the choice of going or not. I had many unanswered questions about faith and religion. Questions like, Jesus says love everyone. It doesn't seem to me everyone is loved if they are excluded because if they believe in a different religion or something else. So how does that work? Also, why do I need to pray if God knows everything I think? And if our religion is the right way, then how can so many other people be wrong? And this was a big one. What does a 100-year-old woman having a baby have to do with me? I was once brave and asked this question in class. And I'm not one to speak up in class, so this was rare. And I recall another student giving me a disgusted look like, oh, it's an example of God's miracles. And that did not answer my question. It did make my decision to stop attending easy. What did I need more Sunday school for anyway? It was all about the golden rule, right? I got that. I got it. So Sundays after that were filled with what we usually did on Sundays anyway: house cleaning and car washing. I'm sure in the moment I complained and didn't like it, but looking back, I loved it. We would have the oldies station blasting music. Everyone knew what had to get done, and we did it in between spontaneous dance parties. Family working together in harmony is how I imagine heaven. I wish I could say the rest of my high school experience was as fun and smooth as Sundays. I worked hard to be a good girl, and it was very isolating and difficult. There were 26 kids in my class, 100 kids in the high school. People love to talk in a small town. I saw good kids labeled because of a mistake. I saw friendships broken in an instant over a misunderstanding. To me, high school was a war zone of emotions, and I did my best to keep my mouth shut and my head down. Sometimes I'd have trouble getting to sleep at night, and I began to pray on my own. And my prayer went like this: now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, and on, you know that one. From there, I would picture in my mind's eye someone important to me, usually starting with my mom, and I would give her a hug, and I would say thank you. And then I would move on to my dad, and if I wasn't annoyed with her, my sister, and whomever else would pop into my head as I was just laying there. Whomever came, I would hug them and say thanks. And then I would finish the prayer with, lead me on my path. And this continued to be my prayer well into adulthood. In the fall of 1995, I began attending Bradley University. And sometimes I think God may have wanted me to be Catholic, because in my path were many, including close friends, college and post-college roommates. While I appreciated their regular dedication to attendance at church, none of them could ever explain to me why they went or what made it so important to them. As a result, my curiosity stopped there. Well, almost. I remember bringing the topic of church and religion to a friend I've known since grade school, a friend that always seemed to me grounded, thoughtful, and at peace in this world, a friend who never attended church. When I asked him his thoughts about church and religion, he said, I don't know spirituality to be about going to a certain place on a certain day at a certain time. He said, I think you can experience something bigger than us in anything. And he suggested I read the book The Alchemist. This has become the only book I've read multiple times, and I return to it every couple of years. And when I do, I question and explore something new in the book and something new in myself. My favorite parts in the book revolve around learning there's a universal language, understood by everybody, but already forgotten. Moving along, in 2001, my roommate and I moved into a different building, and a new friend was put in my path. His name was FJ, and I was instantly intrigued. I vividly recall standing in the doorway of my roommate's bedroom the morning after the big move-in day party. And I casually mentioned to her my interest in FJ. And her response was, FJ? He's not the kind of guy you date. He's the kind of guy you marry. Clearly, I filed that comment away in the advice folder because 12 years ago today we were married. As we got to know each other over several years of dating, it was clear that we would have likely met even if we had not been neighbors because of several other seemingly random connections. Back then, with friends and acquaintances, I could play 3 degrees of F.J. Phillips. In 2003, while we were dating, I found myself fully immersed in adulthood, working long nights and weekends at Neiman Marcus. I was the youngest sales manager, and after several years, I was already burning out. I would spend so much of my time in my head thinking about what I didn't want. I was trapped in a cycle of wishing my days away. Then one day, an angel came to me in the stockroom and asked me what I wanted. Actually, it was an intern from the jewelry department who happened to look like an angel. She came to help me with markdowns, and as we're doing markdowns, she's asking me questions and wondering about my career path and what I wanted to do next. So I told her in great detail how I wanted my career to change so I would be more free to live my life. This was the first time I really thought about and put into words what I truly wanted versus thinking about what I didn't want. Another one of my favorite parts of The Alchemist says, "You must always know what it is that you want. When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you achieve it." It also says, when someone makes a decision, they are really diving into a strong current that will carry them to places they had never dreamed up when they first made the decision. A couple days later, the angel/intern stopped to ask me if it was okay that she gave the David Yurman representative my contact information because they were looking for someone to do the exact job I had described to her. I was shocked and I was grateful. I got the job after a few months of nerve-wracking interviews. I loved my job. Traveling every week and being with new people every day was really wonderful. And I had time to connect on the weekends with friends and family again. In 2006, FJ and I were married, as you know. In our pre-marriage counseling, I found myself frustrated with the process because driving to Peoria on my precious non-travel work time was not ideal. Finally, as we were driving back one day, I looked at him and said, "Why is it so important to you that we get married in a church?" And he explained on how numerous occasions the church family had been there for him and helped him grow into the person he is. From that moment, I stopped complaining in my head and started attending church. Finally, someone gave me a good reason. Family. The way I grew up, family is love. So love is church. I was in. We attended Church of Our Savior in Lincoln Park all through our engagement and up until we moved to Wilmette 5 years ago. While attending COS, we were blessed with the birth of our first son, Everett, after a devastating miscarriage. When Everett was 3 months old, I returned to work. I read a lot while traveling. At one point, I picked up the very popular book, The Secret. I enjoyed it so much, I read the follow-up book, The Magic. In looking back, I can say what I took away from these books and tried to practice was, 1, the importance of gratitude, 2, ways to be present in the moment, and 3, setting intentions that originate in the heart, the gut, a deeper knowing. In The Magic, it suggests you look within for your deepest heart's desires and write 10 of them down. 9 came very easy and had very much to do with the external and material world. The 10th was different, though, and I struggled to write it. I wrote that I want to live my life in a way that I can always say I live a charmed life. I struggled to come up with the right word. Charmed didn't really fit. Now that I have the vocabulary, I'd say what I felt and desired was living in the flow, or a content life. The journal at some point became soaked with a bottle of formula and was thrown out. I took comfort the intention was out there. Work continued to ramp up, and I became National Account Director of our Saks Fifth Avenue account. This was a position even bigger than I had ever dared to dream of. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I was restless and anxious. I found myself wondering, what was the point of having this incredible salary, great bonus, travel perks, prestigious title, awesome responsibility, when I don't even really seem to enjoy it? There was a joke around David Yurman that the company was like the mafia. Either you were swimming in the Hudson after a few days, or you were in for life. As I approached my 10th year, it appeared I was in for life. I remember walking into our New York offices, as I did most Tuesday mornings, and wondering to myself, how can I keep living this way? How do I get out? How can this end? As I was pushing open the door, my head responded, when I have another baby. Then something deep inside me responded to my thoughts and said, no, a loss. As I continued through the door, my mind did not respond. I didn't know where the message, a loss, came from. I now know it was from my heart, my gut, a deeper knowing. Another part of The Alchemist says, listen to your heart. It knows all things because it came from the soul of the world, and it will one day return there. And tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself, and that no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams, because every second of the search is a second's encounter with God and with eternity. Fast forward many months later, I'm back at the office. I'm 10 weeks pregnant, and I haven't told anyone there yet. Then it happened. Another miscarriage. This day, I experienced incredible peace. I knew this was a turning point. My head, heart, and gut all aligned. The loss to make it end was clear, and at the risk of sounding dramatic, Carrie, the road warrior, workaholic, perfectionist, had to die. I had to let her and all the perks go. A little over a year later, we moved to Wilmette. I gave birth to George, our second son, and quit my job. I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and I was thrilled. I was certain I was now on the right path, and I was relieved until I wasn't. How could making the right choice be such a difficult way to live? George was a couple months old, and I was sleep-deprived and quite scattered. One night, blessedly, both boys were sleeping at a reasonable hour, so I left the dishes and other messes, just let them be, and took a bath and read a magazine. Looking for inspiration, I found it, a quote. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Something about the quote sparkled for me, and I was curious. The following days, I carried the quote with me as a mantra, and I would say it to myself again and again as I loaded and unloaded the dishwasher, as I re-potty trained Everett, as I rocked George to sleep in the wee hours of the morning. The following Sunday, we made it to church somehow, and sitting in the back, I was attending to George, while partially listening to the homily, when out of nowhere, I heard the booming voice of God say to me, one must chop wood and carry water before enlightenment. After enlightenment, one must chop wood and carry water. It turns out it wasn't God. The booming voice belonged to Jason. This didn't matter. I got the message. I'm here. Pay attention. As I mentioned earlier in The Alchemist, there's a universal language understood by everybody but already forgotten. It also says, with the words luck and coincidence. It is with those words that the universal language is written. These moments, these synchronicities in life really propel me. So from that point, I decided to figure out what chopping wood and carrying water was all about. But where to begin? I started going to what I now refer to as my other church, Niyama Yoga. I began my long ago abandoned practice of slowing down, being still, and accepting where I am. In yoga, when we come to our mats, we are offered the opportunity to set an intention or dedicate our practice to someone. Yoga for me is prayer in motion, returning to my breath and intention again and again. At the end of our practice, we lay still in savasana, also known as corpse pose. And one of my teachers jokes as we enter the pose, prepare to die. It's kind of what we do, though. Ideally, we let go. We let die anything that is not serving us, all that is not part of our practice. Then, hopefully, I get up, renewed and wiser, knowing all I needed to get to this place of peace was already in me. Shortly after I returned to yoga, I joined the Heath's Monday prayer group. And this practice is a natural companion to the yoga work for me. In prayer group, we include sacred text readings with our contemplative work. Here, I've not only learned to listen to my heart or my gut, but I've also learned to trust the deeper knowing. I've found that when my intentions that come to me in my yoga practice line up with what I journal in prayer group, life becomes very clear. Opportunities to act are placed before me, and all obstacles seem to vanish. I live in the flow. I experienced similar clarity a few years ago attending the Holy Comforter Women's Retreat. On the retreat, we worked through various prayer tools, lessons, and discussions about living our faith outside the walls of the church. It was through a discussion on faith and shoes I was able to identify my gift of empathy. At the end of the retreat, we wrote and shared takeaway statements as we held our gifts, symbolized in rocks. Thank you, Barb. Mine was, regardless of my shoes or theirs, I will walk with them. Now, looking back, and as I've written my story, this Easter story, and reading it again and again, it was recently I had an aha moment of, I wonder if my great-grandmother was part of this. Walking, shoes, there's a theme. I have now intentionally walked with many people since. The wise young souls that gather in the basement on Sunday mornings are some of my favorite walking companions. Charlotte may say I co-teach with her. The truth is, I'm more of a student making up for many years of missed youth formation. It's been a blessing to finally ask long-held questions and wonder out loud about the world and where faith and religion fit in. The past 3 summers, the high school youth group has also welcomed me to walk with them on the ASP trips, that's the Appalachia Service Project trips. The founder of ASP, a Methodist minister, sums up the mission of the trips in these words: we accept people right where they are, just the way they are. In all 3 ASP trips, I was able to press pause on my life and just be. Just be for the families and let them be for me. Love and joy flow so fast and easy on these trips, and I have found that selfless service lifts up all who are involved. Somewhere among the time of all these new practices, I began a different prayer. Here I am. What shall I do? In other words, how can I chop wood and carry water? The answer came days later in the form of a letter from Chris Hardman asking me to consider being a Stephen minister. My head had many reasons to say no. I'm a busy mom. Thankfully, I was practiced at this point for listening to my heart, which said yes. Through the training, I learned much about myself and how I interact with the world. In addition, I learned how to be fully present for another and listen for their heart. It's hard for me to put into words what it is like to walk with another person going through something they would really rather not. I have found that sometimes when we hold the worst things in life with another person, they turn out to be the most precious. I wish I could say I use my gift and training with everyone I encounter. I am not a saint. It is my intention to do so, and I'm practicing every day. And that's where I am on my spiritual path at this point. Still working every day, traveling my short path from my head to my heart to my gut, a deeper knowing, again and again. Namaste.